The content of this podcast is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended as, nor should it be considered a substitute for professional medical advice. Hello, this is Karen Nickel, family nurse practitioner, and you are listening to Itchy and Bitchy, a podcast that provides answers to your many unanswered health questions. Before we get started on today's episode, I want to remind you about my course for perimenopausal women. After speaking with many women who are in this phase of life, I have developed a comprehensive course to help address the symptoms that so many women experience in their 30s, 40s, and early 50s. If you would like to talk to me about the course, there is a link on our website, itchyandbitchy.com, and on our Facebook page, I&B Podcast, where you can schedule an appointment for a Zoom call with me. I am starting the course on Tuesday, January 31st, 2023, so it's coming right up. So schedule now if you want to chat. A friend of mine recently contacted me to tell me that she had just had a fall at work and hit the left side of her forehead on a metal clothes rod and had a big bump on her forehead and bruising around her eyes. She asked what she should do. So I asked her a series of questions to determine if she needed urgent care. I often get calls with questions about head injuries because for the last 3 years of the pandemic, people are very hesitant about going to the emergency department. So they want to know if they really need to go. Every head trauma needs to be evaluated by a medical professional, but I thought I would help clarify for you when you really need to go to the emergency department and when it is okay to schedule an appointment at your primary care office to be evaluated. Head injuries can vary in severity. A mild head injury can be caused by a cut, a bump, or bruise on the head. A lot of us have had that kind of injury, and fortunately, not every hit to the head will result in a brain injury, thank goodness. But it is important to know what to look for to determine if it needs to be evaluated immediately. More severe head injuries can cause concussion, skull fracture, brain bleeds, and brain damage. A sad statistic is that head injuries are a major cause of death in adults. However, the majority of head injuries in the U.S. are concussions, which are considered a mild brain injury. Not that you want any brain injury, but most of the head injuries are mild brain injuries. Many of you have heard the term TBI, or traumatic brain injury. This is when a bump or blow to the head causes a disruption in normal brain function. A TBI can occur from a blow to the head caused by a vehicle accident or assault, but the majority of TBIs happen because of a fall. Many of you may recall hearing about Bob Saget, the actor who was found dead in his hotel room. An autopsy revealed that he had multiple skull fractures and bleeding in the brain. He was alone at the time, and his family reported that he had hit the back of his head, thought it was no big deal, went to bed, went to sleep, and never woke up. Unfortunately, brain injuries that are life-threatening are not uncommon. In 2019, 61,000 people in the U.S. died from TBIs, according to the CDC. My patient last year was one of those people who died from TBI after falling down the stairs. Knowing when to seek help for yourself or someone else can be life-saving. If you are alone when you have a hit to the head, it is especially important to know what to do. TBIs have a range of severity. Concussions are the mildest form of TBIs. If you sustain a concussion, you may feel dazed and have headaches, neck pain, slow thinking, and vision changes. The symptoms usually resolve slowly over a few weeks, and there are no findings on a brain scan. No findings on a brain scan. You can get a concussion by hitting your head on something like a cabinet door, by playing contact sports, or by falling. I have a niece who sustained a concussion when she fell while playing tennis and hit the back of her head. I have another niece who was propelled forward over the handlebars of her bicycle when she hit a large rock on a trail. She landed on her head so hard she cracked her helmet and wound up with a concussion. I am sure all of you listening know someone who has had a concussion as a result of a similar trauma. As I mentioned, we will not see changes on brain scans when someone has a concussion. Scan changes will be seen in moderate to severe TBIs. Changes on the scan can include bruising of brain tissue, bleeding between the brain and skull, bleeding within the brain, or fractures in the skull. If someone has a blow to the head and the CT of the head shows no brain bleed or fracture, I always tell the person to be on the lookout for signs and symptoms of a brain bleed, even though the scan looks good, because the kind of bleeding that occurs between the brain and the skull can occur several days or even 2 to 3 weeks after the injury. It's so important to monitor your symptoms for a few weeks after a head injury so you can seek help if needed. Bleeding and swelling in the brain is quite dangerous, as you can imagine, because it causes extra pressure within the brain, which presses on the brain tissue and restricts blood flow that can lead to brain damage or death. A hematoma is another thing that can happen with a head trauma. A hematoma is a collection of blood that can happen inside the skull next to the brain. This is a type of hematoma that can be very dangerous because it can cause pressure on the brain tissue. Another type of hematoma is one that occurs between the skull and the scalp. This is a type of blood collection that can cause a visible bump that we often call a goose egg. This collection of blood does not put pressure on the brain because it is outside the skull. I'll review who is high risk for serious brain injury and the signs to watch for when you've had a blow to the head when we come back. Of course, any of us can be at risk for TBI, but there are people who have more risk than others. People with bone loss, either osteopenia or osteoporosis, are at higher risk for skull fracture with a blow to the head because of the bone loss. People age 65 or older are at increased risk for serious TBI because they have thinner blood vessels and smaller brains due to the shrinking of the brain as we age. No, you don't want to hear that, but there it is. When blood vessels are thin, they can tear more easily, causing a bleed. And if your brain has shrunk due to aging, there is more room for your brain to be shaken around inside the skull when you hit your head. You are also at higher risk for a brain bleed following a head trauma if you are taking a blood thinner like Xarelto, Eliquis, Pradaxa, Coumadin, or aspirin. Others who are at higher risk for severe symptoms are people with dementia or memory problems, small children, or people who have a substance abuse disorder, because they may not be able to explain their symptoms well, so it can be hard to determine how serious the injury is or even if there was an injury. So how the heck will you know that you have a TBI? Because it is not like other injuries on the body where you can see the injury such as a cut or a sprain, burn, or broken bone. With a head injury, one needs to be really aware of the symptoms they're having to help determine how severe it is. Sometimes you will have a cut or bump after hitting your head, but oftentimes there are no outward signs. So symptoms of a mild TBI or concussion include dizziness or trouble balancing, headaches, light or noise sensitivity, having no energy or just feeling tired, nausea or vomiting soon after the injury, immediately after the injury that's not prolonged, maybe a couple episodes, feeling like you're moving in slow motion, foggy thinking, feeling more emotional, being quick to anger or irritable, feeling sad, having trouble falling asleep, sleeping more than usual, or sleeping less than usual. Even if you are having mild TBI symptoms, it is recommended that you are seen by a healthcare provider within a week of the injury. This is important because a concussion can worsen some existing problems like migraines or anxiety or other mood disorders or vertigo. And your primary care provider needs to be monitoring whether these existing problems are worsening after the trauma. Also, because over time symptoms can get worse, it's important that your healthcare provider is monitoring your symptoms after the injury. One of the best arguments for getting help within a week, even if the symptoms are not severe, is that a study in 2020 showed that people who had medical attention within a week after the head injury recovered faster than those who waited longer to be seen for the problem. If you have a mild, moderate, or severe TBI, your healthcare provider needs to know that information because risk for cardiovascular and endocrine conditions after TBI is much higher than for those who do not have a history of TBI. If your provider knows this information, they can be proactive in taking appropriate disease prevention measures. It's an important history, so please, please, please share it. Okay, so here is where you really need to listen up if you haven't been listening carefully thus far, which I can't even imagine. Here are the signs and symptoms that indicate the need to get urgent care. Signs and symptoms that indicate the need to get urgent care. If one pupil is larger than the other, this is a sign that the brain is not working right. Speech problems such as slurring speech, inability to form words, or garbled speech. Being profoundly confused or difficulty forming thoughts or answering questions. The inability to wake up or inability to stay awake. Loss of consciousness for any amount of time, even if only a few seconds. If you've lost consciousness or someone you see who has a head trauma lost consciousness, that is an emergency department visit. Repeated nausea and or vomiting. In a mild TBI, again, you may have 1 or 2 episodes of nausea right after the episode, but the symptoms do not persist. In a more serious injury, you keep vomiting, keep having nausea. Seizure-like activity, like twitching or shaking for any amount of time after a head injury, even if it's only a few seconds. Any seizure-like activity is an emergency department visit. Any type of weakness in the body or lack of normal coordination, for instance, inability to take a fork full of food from the plate to your mouth. Persistent or severe headache, like a headache like you've never had before. If you have clear fluid coming from the nose or ears, this is an ED appointment or visit. That fluid is spinal fluid and should not be there. Also look for bloody fluid that's coming from the ears or nose. That's, again, an emergency department visit. Even if you or someone you know does not have symptoms that I just listed, but is a person at high risk, they should report to an emergency department after a head trauma. So if you're on blood thinner or you've been diagnosed with bone loss or you're over the age of 65 or if you've had a previous TBI, head to the emergency department no matter what your symptoms are. If you're alone when you have a head injury like Bob Saget was, make sure to contact someone, tell them what happened and what your symptoms are, and seek appropriate help. It is so important to take measures to prevent a TBI. Protect your brain. And you can do that by using handrails when you use the stairs and install handrails in your bathroom. A friend of mine always counts the stairs as she's going up and down, especially if she's carrying something. Keep the stairs free of clutter. Don't put papers and whatever on the stairs to carry up the stairs. I know sometimes there's live clutter, meaning we used to have a small dog and a cat, and both of them loved me dearly for whatever reason. And they were always underfoot, always. And I would tell my husband, if you come home and I'm at the bottom of the stairs dead, it's because that cat or that dog got under my feet and down I went. So I don't know exactly how to keep your animals from twisting around your legs as you walk down the stairs, but just be aware, I guess, if you have animals who tend to do that. Another reason to use the handrail, by the way. Put a non-slip bath mat in your tub or shower and make sure your home is well lit. Strengthen your core. Strengthen your core. Where have you heard that before? Can't imagine. Strengthen your core to improve your balance. Get regular eye exams so you can see what you're doing. Remove small area rugs and use non-slip rug pads under your larger area rugs. Wear a seatbelt. Please wear a seatbelt. Don't drive under the influence of alcohol or drugs, and wear a helmet when riding bicycles, skateboarding, on an ATV, motorcycle, snowmobile. Also wear head protection when participating in contact snowboarding, or riding a horse. And if you play baseball, make sure to wear a helmet. Lastly, I want to let you know what you should do if you are around someone when they sustain a moderate or severe brain injury. First, call 911. Secondly, check for a pulse and breathing and start CPR if indicated. If the breathing and heart rate are normal, treat the injury like you would a spinal injury. Stabilize the head by putting your hands on either side of the head and align the head with the spine and prevent movement until help arrives. If you suspect a skull fracture, say you see an indentation in someone's head, for instance, do not apply pressure to the area to stop bleeding, and do not try to clean debris out of the wound. If there is a scalp wound without evidence of a skull fracture, no evidence of a skull fracture, use a clean cloth to apply pressure to the wound, and if it becomes soaked, blood-soaked, the cloth, don't remove the cloth. Just add another cloth on top of the first one and apply pressure. If the person is vomiting or about to vomit, in order to prevent choking, roll the person's head, neck, and body onto their side as one unit while stabilizing the head. If you have them, apply ice packs wrapped in a towel to any swollen areas. Back to my friend who fell at work. She had no signs or symptoms of moderate or severe TBI. Those signs and symptoms were reviewed with her in detail, and she was cautioned that symptoms could be delayed, and she should look for those symptoms for the next 2 to 3 weeks and report to the emergency department if any of those symptoms developed. She had a hematoma, the type between the skull and the scalp. She was advised to apply gentle pressure and ice to the area, which provided resolution of the symptoms. We also discussed ways to make changes in her workspace to avoid future falls. I hope this has been helpful. Please protect the one and only brain you have. I encourage you to visit our Facebook page, IMB Podcast, where you can leave comments or questions for me. Our website is itchyandbitchy.com. There are blogs on that site with some of our favorite subjects available for you to read. On the Facebook page and website, we have the information about how to schedule an appointment with me so that we can chat about my perimenopause course and how it can help you if you're going through this phase of life. As always, thank you to Forrest Winsel, our producer and composer of our theme music, and the person who does all the work when I say we do this and we do that. Thank you, Forrest. Check out his album called An Awful Lot. Go to wherever you stream your favorite music to listen. And if you don't know where to stream music, you can find the album on Apple Music or Spotify. And as always, remember that your health is in your hands. Bye.